The number of people who died because of drug misuse in Scotland last year fell by 279, the lowest level for 5 years. It is a significant drop, but Scotland continues to have the worst drug death rate in Europe. Well, we can speak now to Andy Cowan, whose son Daniel died after taking a fatal cocktail of drugs in Edinburgh. Thank you so much for coming on to Sky News to speak to us about something that affects you so personally. First of all, tell us about your son.
So Daniel was 29, very fit, healthy, lovely young man. He was a boxer. He was loved by all of his friends, so his life was tragically cut short by really what was a mistake. He was having a celebration with a friend. He was celebrating a new job. And unfortunately, his friend had got some drugs from the web, as young people often do, and the drugs that he took had been laced with opioids. We think it was probably fentanyl, but Daniel thought he was taking ecstasy, and they found something else when they examined. And the next morning, he just didn't wake up. And so we got the phone call from the police, and that was 7 years ago now. And as you might imagine, it was utterly devastating for the family, and in many ways it still is.
Yeah, Andy, you know, most of us can't begin to imagine, but sadly, so many families know exactly what you're going through. And the problem in the UK is particular to Scotland. You know, when we talk about Scotland and drug misuse, you know, the stereotypical image is of the Trainspotting film. In fact, we spoke to Irvine Welsh, who wrote the book, you know, about drug use in the 80s in Glasgow, and people think of that. But it's not that. It is, you know, there is hardcore addiction, but there is also recreational drug use. And those numbers are pulled into these bigger figures up in Scotland. And your son, from what you know, of course, parents and children don't always have an open relationship when it comes to, you know, recreational drug use. But from what you found out afterwards, your son came under that category. He wasn't an addict. This was just something that he did occasionally for fun.
That's right, Sarah Jane. And we weren't really aware of it until after he died, but he did occasionally take recreational drugs as part of the, I guess, the sort of partying culture. He was a very social young guy, and he had lots of friends, and he loved to be out and partying. And of course, now we understand, as parents who have had to learn the hard way what this is all about, that this is widespread, that millions of people in this country and all over the world take these recreational drugs almost on a fairly routine basis, and they have to buy them on the black market because they are entirely illegal and prohibited in the UK. But there is a huge black market industry. It's one of the biggest industries in the world. And the people who are benefiting from this industry are the billionaire criminal cartels. And of course, they are quite happy with the status quo. And the political answer to all this is just that we need to come down harder on the criminals. We need to criminalize people who are in possession. We need to give them jail sentences. And somehow we need to stop people from using drugs. And in my entire lifetime, and by the way, I'm 62 today, and in my entire lifetime, that strategy has failed and has not been successful. And certainly I believe that it will never be successful because people will continue to take recreational drugs. And I think we need a new paradigm. We need a new answer. We need to think of this differently, because all we're getting is this bad news of thousands and thousands of people dying because effectively they've been poisoned by recreational drugs, which are produced by criminals.
You speak about this from not just a personal point of view, but, you know, you've had to learn more than most people would want to about drugs use, and about, you know, what other countries do to tackle this problem. Because a lot of people refer back to Portugal, which, you know, was in the grip of a heroin and HIV crisis in the last decades of the 20th century. It responded by decriminalising the possession of drugs for personal use. This is something that SNP ministers are toying with. The Tory government in London opposed the idea. Do you see that as the key? It seems so radical to people who aren't affected like you are.
Yes, and just looking at my own situation, had Daniel, on the evening that he died, had he, rather than buying drugs from the dark web, and some might say, because drugs have a stigma, and some will just say, well, I'm sorry, he shouldn't be taking drugs. How long are we going to be saying that? People shouldn't take drugs when millions of people do and always will do. So I'm sorry, they shouldn't take drugs is just not a good enough answer. That's why people are dying. But if Daniel had been able to go to the local pharmacy, if he'd been able to buy recreational drugs that have been produced and manufactured and distributed by reputable chemists, and it was allowed for him to do that, he could have taken his recreational drugs and he would have woken up the next morning and started his new job, and he would still be here. Now, that is a radical shift, and I'm not arguing for a free-for-all. I'm suggesting there has to be a lot of regulation around this. But at the moment, all that we're doing is covering our ears and saying we don't really want to think about it. We don't want to pretend that people take drugs, and we just don't want to think about another answer. Meanwhile, as I said earlier, millions of people like Daniel, perfectly respectable, good people, are taking recreational drugs, and they're being poisoned and they're dying. And as you've said, Sarah Jane, there are countries that have looked at alternatives, and increasingly so. And I'm glad that the SNP are looking at that, because I think what we need is a paradigm shift. We need to remove the stigma. If we can accept that people will take drugs, then the answer is, how do we let that happen in the safest possible way? How do we keep our citizens safe whilst they're taking drugs? Because it's just not good enough to say, don't take them. That hasn't worked for so long.
Well, Andy, thank you so much for speaking to us here on Sky News. On your birthday as well, you're doing Daniel proud by, talking about him and raising awareness. As you said, drugs have been around for centuries. It's not until they became illegal that criminals became involved. So it's a really sensible discussion that You're quite right, needs to be had in the open and more often. Andy Cowan there, thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Thank you.